Well, hello everyone, and welcome to the hockey edition of Agree or Disagree the podcast. It is Saturday. Of course, it's Kevin Olenek. Lots to get into this week. It's been a very interesting week in Vancouver Canuck land. As always, we'll get into that, and let's touch on other things going around in the National Hockey League. Joined, as always, with Sean from Calgary. How are you?
I'm good, thanks.
Good. How are you feeling about being trolled about Matthew Tkachuk?
He's definitely chosen the right time to have a breakout week for the first time in a bit.
Yeah. Joining us as well is Tyler. How are you?
I'm doing well, thanks, Kevin.
You're not being trolled or anything?
No, everybody's leaving me alone. It's good, peaceful, up in northern BC, nice and quiet.
Nice.
As usual.
Joining us for the first time, coming in on what they've called Schneid's time, but he is here, joining us for the first time, living in Calgary, but a diehard Canucks fan. Chris Schneider at Schneid's is joining us as well. How are you?
I'm doing well. Thanks for inviting me.
Thanks for coming on. You've had a lot going on as well. We'll maybe get into that a little bit later if you want. But the big news this week is the signing of Quinn Hughes, which had Canucks fans respond something like this. The chorus all over Vancouver. For his part, Quinn Hughes, of course, unfortunately, had a little bit of a scare last weekend during the playoffs with his foot. As he arrived in Vancouver this week, this is what he had to say about that.
I'd probably say around there. I haven't seen a couple days, so I don't know how it feels there, but watching it feels a little bit better with certain movements.
If it has been a regular season game, would you have played that second game against Minnesota?
I mean, I don't know. I want to play every game, but obviously I was a little bit more motivated for this game because it could have been my last, which it was. So.
What about the time frame here in terms of getting on ice for the first time, even first skate?
Yeah, I think they just want to see that MI report, depending on how that goes. And if it's good, then obviously probably see it right away.
And how?
So what was expected later on in the week is he's still in a walking boot, and it was expected to be for a week, out for a week. Of course, we've had this conversation on this before in terms of what we were expecting in terms of Quinn Hughes not playing 10 games because that would expect his expansion availability for Seattle. But now comes the fact that if he even plays one game, it counts against his 1 year of the contract. So this becomes the question as the season rolls on here. It's expected, some are expecting that the possibility of the debut will be next Saturday against the Calgary Flames, which would be quite a fascinating parallel, remembering Johnny Gaudreau's debut a number of years ago against the Vancouver Canucks. But I guess the first question to bring up here, or the thought process, is it worth playing Quinn Hughes at all this year?
Oh, it totally is. At this point, the Canucks need to be selling hope and the future, and that's what Quinn Hughes is. And as much as losing a year on his contract can be an issue, I don't think it's something that you really have to get too up in arms about, because he is the future of the Canucks blue line, and you need to start selling that and give him a few games to figure out what the NHL game looks like.
And I think the organization wants to see what they have with him in the mix and what kind of pairs they could have and how ready he is. If you're not going to negatively impact his status for the expansion draft, and you're not going to get him a year closer to unrestricted free agency, then I don't think there's much harm in getting him in there, even outside of marketing and selling hope reasons.
And yeah, I have to agree with both of the other two. I basically stole my points.
Yeah. I mean, I guess if it was an expensive, I do think it's from a marketing standpoint. I mean, you even look at what happened in Ottawa. They brought in the prospect that they got for Mark Stone in, and I think it's important for the fan base to see Quinn Hughes and to get hope. I think that's important. But I also think for Quinn Hughes, as Adam Gaudette said, there's such a value in understanding what the NHL game is like and what to prepare for next season and what you need to do to prepare in the off season. And you've seen a big improvement from Adam Gaudette in terms of what's his play throughout the season, that I can't see this hurting Quinn Hughes in any way, shape, or form. I can only see this helping. And it even helped Brock Besser.
Like Brock, where we only played him for I think 4 or 5 games, but it gave both him and the fans a taste of him at the NHL level.
Yeah, and it's just something to get. I mean, there's a lot of excitement about him already. Whether it's too high or not, I guess that's a whole other debate for another time. But I think people want to see what they have, and especially going into next season where this defense is pretty much up in flux, no matter how well you look at it or which way you look at it. This defense is pretty much in flux. I think that everybody needs to see where Quinn Hughes is at and where they need to build going forward. The other news, actually, I wanted to get into this because before we get into Loui Ericksson, because we haven't had Chris on the show yet. Chris, what has been your impressions of the Canucks this year? What have you liked, and what has bothered you this year?
Obviously I wasn't going into this season with super high expectations, but I was, maybe hoping that we were going to do 5 or 10 points better, at least, pushing for a playoff spot, as opposed to petering out for this past month that we have been. Ultimately, I wouldn't say this season has been a disappointment, but it definitely hasn't raised the bar as much as I was hoping initially.
So what has specifically disappointed you?
Obviously players like Pettersson have been great, but it's more so the secondary scoring and maybe the development of some of the younger prospects advancing the game a little bit further.
So those two. Okay. All right. Well, let's get into Mr. Loui Ericksson. He was scratched. It was a healthy scratch for the game against the New York Rangers, which they won. He was back in the lineup last night. Here's what Travis Green had to say about that after the Rangers game.
Yeah, never an easy decision to sit a guy that's been in the league a long time. You've seen it happen, around the league a few times. And, it's hard for guys that have been in the league. So it wasn't an easy decision.
Why now?
You know what? To be honest, it's not like I'm sitting here saying he's played so bad that I'm going to take him out of the lineup. I wanted to put Granny back in, and he was the guy that drew out. Simple.
So here is Loui Eriksson's statistics, just for everyone's information. When he left into the Boston Bruins in 2015-2016, he played 82 games. He scored 30 goals, 33 assists, 63 points. In 3 seasons with the Vancouver Canucks, he actually has finally matched that 30-goal plateau. He has 31 goals. He has almost 20. He has just passed the assist mark a little bit by 38, which has given him a total of 69 points. So he has just recently passed his entire 2015-16 season in his career with the Vancouver Canucks. So was this too late? Was this on time? What were your guys' thoughts on the scratching of Loui Ericksson?
I think it was too late. The play that Loui has had the last season, even into the season before, has been lackluster at best. His skating is completely gone. He doesn't have the wheels anymore to keep up with the game that just keeps getting younger and faster. And it just completely shows. There's lots of people who think that he doesn't show the effort, but I just think that's because he doesn't have the wheels and the skating legs anymore to keep up. He's been an okay penalty killer for the Canucks, but that's it. And I think it's time to move on and find a way to open up his roster spot for a younger, faster player.
I have to say I'm a little bit surprised that he got the healthy scratch. It's always a big decision for a team to take when they sit a guy with a contract that big and with that many years left. I didn't see him as completely useless, but that's not saying much for a guy that's making that kind of money and he's playing on the fourth line. He didn't seem to be taking that and trying to figure out a way forward to improve his game. It just kind of got stagnant to the point where the coach has sat other people and he's looking at the names on the lineup card there and saying, yeah, you know what? It's his turn to sit out. I think is what it comes down to.
Yeah, I would have to agree with that, as well as with Loui, like Jim was saying that they're potentially hinting at trying to move him in the offseason, and sitting him as a healthy scratch is probably not going to help his value as far as, the currency in the open market. So, yeah, it's hard to see really where they're going to go from here with that.
Well, what was interesting also was it wasn't on this clip, but I heard Travis Green says you need to give me a reason to keep you in the lineup, and he hasn't necessarily, and it's not like Granlund has been like someone that's really important to get in and out of the lineup, because we've talked about Granlund a lot this year, and he hasn't been lighting it up either. I mean, I don't know what you would get for Loui Ericksson anyway. I mean, I think that there are going to be teams simply because they like Ottawa and even probably in Arizona. There'll be teams that need to grab players because they need to hit that salary floor. So I think that there will be some value in that, maybe a little bit more value in that. But I mean, what you get for him or what you get for him, I don't know. I tend to think, though, that this was a little bit too late. I think that there was an opportunity. There was an opportunity to bring some prospects in or someone else in to give a little bit of a message, because we've talked a little bit about this before, and Tyler Shipley kind of observed this when we talked about Goldobin. Like, why if it feels like was a bit of a double standard in terms of how Travis Green treats the veterans as opposed to he treats the newcomers, and there's a different expectation there. Because we've seen Goldobin not perform, fairly or not, and he dealt with a healthy scratch. But this has been 3 seasons of Loui Ericksson not performing, and this is the first time he's been scratched.
Yeah, it just hasn't worked out with Loui and the Canucks. And even if you look at the dollar amount that the Canucks will have paid out to him come July 1st, the Canucks, I believe, will have only $9 million to pay him left in actual real dollars. So for the teams like Ottawa and Arizona who need to get up to the cap floor, it's a good contract to acquire money wise, to get a high cap hit player to help them get there.
I mean, the other option is Utica, what they did with Sam Gagner. Do you think that's possible? Or I'm kind of thinking that Aquilini would cringe at doing that again.
Yeah, I mean, that's one you'd have to run up the ladder with the owner to see if he's comfortable with burying a guy in the minors. They have done it before, so it's not impossible, I guess. I don't see how he would get claimed on the waiver with that kind of contract. But you can never be too sure. You asked the question earlier, Kevin, what would you get for Loui Ericksson? How about cap relief? Just moving him would be a start. So, but obviously they'd be hoping to get some kind of draft pick return or something.
I think it just doesn't matter what you get in return. If you can get rid of him, it's not necessarily the cap relief, but the roster spot that opens up is big. So it doesn't really matter what you get in return as long as you get rid of him.
Yeah. Chris, were you going to say something? Oh, Chris, are you still there?
Oh, yeah, I'm still here. I just said, I agree.
Oh, okay.
Else to add.
Okay. The other news that happened last night, although this is the second one that happened this season. Of course, Antoine Roussel went down in the Rangers game for the season. And just quickly to touch on Roussel, I do think that this guy has been a really valuable member of the Canucks. Has it been spectacular? No, but he has been a guy that you can play with pretty much anyone. I think he's given the team some life. That game against Vegas, I found that he was one of the guys that made an effort at least. I've never seen him not make an effort in a hockey game, at least this year. I don't know what your quick thoughts on Roussel and his value to the team going forward.
Well, Roussel just quickly became the heartbeat of the locker room and the Canucks. You could ask him where the headspace of the team was, and he could be able to give you the answer. And he just, as you said, Kevin, you can play him up and down the lineup with anyone. If someone, and he can drag the more skilled players into the battles and get them with a little more energy and pull them into the game a little bit more. So he's very important to the Canucks' future for the next couple of years at the very least.
Chris, I'll let you go.
Like an offensive upgrade on what Dorsett was for our roster last season.
Yeah. I wouldn't disagree with that. Dorsett was a pretty huge loss, though, overall to the team, I think. But, I wouldn't disagree with that.
Yeah, absolutely. You need that grit still.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we saw again the other night with Kreider and Pettersson. Nobody reacts to that. Yeah, they did get the 5 in the game called there, and Pettersson came back and seems to be fine. But just another example of a non-response. And back in the Dorsett days, I mean, everybody knew he'd be out there fighting somebody, whether then or later in the game. So he was a pretty effective deterrent, and the Canucks don't have that anymore.
Or at the very least, just jawing at them incessantly and, getting under their skin for doing something like that.
Yeah.
Which Roussel is good at.
Yeah. Well, I mean, Besser went after Kreider, but you don't want Brock Besser to be going after Chris Kreider. You want a Roussel type, a Dorsett type to do that.
Or if you're Hot Night in Canada, you want Goodbranson to do that.
Yeah, and I mean, we've talked about that on the podcast here. I was a fan of Goodbranson's toughness, but I mean, it is a league where you have to offer something a little more than that to maintain your spot. Agreed. That was the unfortunate part for Goodbranson. He's definitely a heart and soul guy. Just couldn't defend. Just couldn't do it consistently.
And to be fair to the guys on the ice, that Kreider incident was a little weird. I think it caught a lot of people off guard. I know I didn't see it until the replay. So I think it was Besser and Levo both sort of went after Kreider for a little bit and gave him face wash for it. And had he not been kicked out of the game, I think he would have had to answer the bell.
Are you okay with the $5,000 fine?
No, I think that was he got off light. I think he should have gotten a game for that.
I'm gonna maybe partially disagree with that. I mean, the fine, the amount of the fine is not very much. It's kind of, you can just snicker at the amount of the fine, but for him to get a 5 in the game, they lost the game. Pettersson returned. And then they still did the public shaming with a fine. I mean, as far as comparing that to other supplementary discipline that happens around the NHL, it's not like ridiculously offside or out of line. But, I mean, obviously, Pettersson's our guy. We're Pettersson people, so we would have liked to seen something more there. But I was, frankly, I was surprised that they even issued the fine.
Yeah, if there wasn't the 5 in the game, then I would say give them a game suspension. But the fact that they did do the 5 in the game right away, yeah, I'm fine with just the $5,000 fine.
I don't know. I see both sides of this. If this was okay, yeah, I got to say it. If this was McDavid, the Oilers' Twitter would have went off.
Oh, yeah. There would have been way more screaming for sure.
Yeah. And the Oilers' media would have went off and said that Connor McDavid is getting this again, this, that, and that again. So
I would say as well, Kevin, if this happened to a Montreal Canadiens player, you'd probably get some big noise there too, given that history a few years back with Kreider crashing into Carey Price. I'm sure Chris Kreider's not well liked in Habs Nation.
No. I guess for me, if you would have, I would have rather have had nothing been done than a $5,000 fine, because that feels like lip service. It's to me like I guess it's either a suspension or nothing. I guess for me to be that black and white, like $5,000 doesn't feel like much. Like it's just like
It's the public shaming part of it, right? I mean, the player's name is in the news, and it's not good news. You know, I mean, $5,000 is a drop in the bucket to most NHL players.
Yeah, I don't.
Kevin Bieksa has said in the past that it's not really a deterrent for them.
No,
well, there you go.
No.
I mean, remember when Brandon Prust speared Brad Marchand and said it was the best $5,000 he ever spent? You know,
wasn't there a GoFundMe from Canucks fans that day too, or something?
I think so.
Yeah.
I know Habs fans that I'm friends with were applauding that too. So
yeah. Flames. The NHL was applauding that. But that led to another injury to Chris Tanev, and there's a tweet out from a guy named Chris Cont79 that goes through the list of injuries that Chris Tanev has had the last few seasons. And we don't have time to go through it. That's how long this is. But I know that there are some that want to make this lessens his value, and I know that some of the media here want to make some light jokes about why Chris Tanev gets hurt all the time. I actually legitimately feel bad for this human being. As Sean mentioned off air, Tanev actually spent the offseason trying to get some equipment to get his own equipment to deal with this that was much more effective. It's not like this guy is trying to get hurt. He's legitimately wants to play the game of hockey, and it's like just such I feel bad for this guy.
Yeah, it's a tough position for the organization, because what they really need is to have him and Edler be healthy and play 70 games a season, and neither of them are able to do that, and they're putting them in a tough position. I think it is time this summer to look at whether or not they can, if the right deal comes along, they can find a way to move him and get something for him. But it's not something that they really need to explore intensively, because he does, when he is in the lineup and playing, he is so valuable to them.
Yeah, I heard Botchford recently talking about the fact that everyone still keeps on referring to Edler and Tanev as their number one, but they really need to just overhaul the defense right now, because if you put those two guys on another team, I doubt that they're going to be your 1 and 2 pairing, or your 1 and 2 guy.
Yeah, I see it the same way there. I mean, it was already apparently tough getting some kind of trade to happen with Chris Tanev. I mean, every year he's speculated as being a potential trade piece, and then it doesn't happen. And I've said before, you have to wonder whether teams are looking at him as unreliable in terms of staying in the lineup.
They're
not
trying
going
to
to give
become
up
the
much
new
for that.
Sammy Sallow in that regard.
Yeah.
Can't remember who tweeted it out, but I saw a tweet basically putting the Canucks record with Edler and Tanev in the lineup versus with one of them, at least one of them out of the lineup, and the Canucks are like 10 games under 500 with one of those guys injured, and 7 games above 500 with them in the lineup. So it's, as much as we want that, the numbers in terms of wins and losses don't lie in terms of how valuable they really are.
I still think Alex Edler can help a team. I think, is it top 2? No. Can he play it often top 4 minutes on a few teams in this league? Probably. He's still getting a good chunk of ice time. I don't think he's been necessarily that ineffective. And as mentioned by Sean, he's been able to win. I do agree with Tanev. The problem isn't his ability. The problem is his reliability, or the perception if he can stay on the ice. But he's also one of those guys, if he can keep healthy in a playoff run, there's an old saying that you can never have too many defensemen. I think that a playoff team would find some value in that. But I don't know. I still think even going into next year, with what's coming up in terms of the young, you've got Quinn Hughes, you've got Loui Ericksson. I don't think it hurts to have that mentoring sidekick there like Alex Edler, helping him out, get at least learning and understanding the game.
For sure, and it also appears that he has no real desire to leave this franchise either. He's not leaving. Although I think that there's a legitimate debate about how many years, but yeah. And
I think that's why we haven't seen an extension yet, is because there's a legit divide between the organization and Tanev as to how many years should be on the next contract.
Yeah. And if he needs to be part of that Seattle expansion list.
Yeah.
Which I think you could possibly sell him on. I mean, it's not far from here. I don't know. But I'm not in his head, right? I just, I guess one of the things when I was listening to Ken Danico yesterday on the pregame or the pre-pregame show on 650, one of the things that he talked about is he would rather have been part of the solution instead of part of the problem. And maybe that's where Edler is kind of thinking, right? I don't want to go away. I want to help and see if I can make this team win, which is, I guess, an admirable trait. But
yeah, and it's he definitely does want to be part of the solution here, and we'll see what happens. But hopefully, the Canucks can get that right contract done and move on, because I think he does add something very valuable to the Canucks blue line, as is Chris Tanev when he isn't injured.
Which leads. Oh, go ahead, Chris.
Oh yeah, I was going to say that the disagreement on the term is definitely something I can understand, because like Edler's perspective, they saw that contract that Beagle got, and they're like, well, he's the same age as me. Why does he get 4 and you guys don't want to do 4 for me? But you can also see from the Canucks perspective where you kind of want to transition him out of the lineup at this point and maybe not want to give him 4 years, even though defensemen typically tend on being more reliable at older ages than forwards.
Yeah. Which leads us to the guy handing out the contracts, the guy that has to make the decision on how long, the guy that has to make the decision on the trades. There has been a lot of criticism this month. It even got to the point during the Vegas game that there has been a chant and it has trended on Twitter, fire Benning. It is becoming a question of whether Jim Benning is the guy to carry this rebuild forward. I'll get into there's an interesting tweet in comparison to what's going on in Vancouver and Toronto, but Where are you guys on that? Do you think that how long would you give Jim Benning on this, or is it time to move on, or are you like this is I think it's time to keep let's see what he can do.
Well, we have to remember that it was just about this time last year that they extended Jim Benning. So to go from an extension to a multi-year extension to firing him in the season after, I don't think is realistic. I do think that he's going to get he'll get next year to see if the Canucks can take a step forward and not be a basement team. And if they do make some strides, then I think that'll give him some more leash. But he's got at least one more year left.
I would argue for 2 years before they even give any thought to the idea of making a change there. But yeah, the next year in particular is key. You know, if they take another step backwards, then I think he's in trouble. I mean, my feeling with ownership is if they look like they're close and they don't feel like he's the right guy, then they'll make a change then. But I think on drafting and just on drafting alone, I think Benning's been able to earn himself that extension and earn some leash from ownership. I think the owner's pleased with what he's been able to do in terms of drafting and give the fans some optimism around younger players. So yeah, I don't know. I know the province newspaper wants to run him out of town, but I don't think that's the right course of action at all right now.
Yeah, for me, it's not the right timing if that's what you want to do. Like, let him finish out his plan, if you will. Give him another year, possibly two, to actually try and get this rebuild into high gear at this point. Because now you want to get it to the point where the young players are now starting to step into their own. And if you fire him right now and bring in a new GM, I think that they would try and have too many fresh ideas and would basically mess up what we currently have going for us.
What is Jim Benning's strength? I mean, I guess it's obvious. I guess the obvious part is drafting. But what else do you see from Jim Benning? Like, what do you see as a strength with this guy?
Oh, his drafting for the most part has been good. I think the first couple seasons left a little bit to be desired, as we saw last night with Matthew Tkachuk getting 5 points and having a really good season, and Loui Ericksson hasn't made the show yet. But for the most part, he's done really well, especially the last couple years with getting Quinn Hughes and Elias Pettersson in the first round, and we're seeing Adam Gaudette stepping in after coming out of college. We're seeing Madden looking really good with Northeastern, as well as Jet Wu looking really good with Moose Jaw. I think there's a lot to be a lot of stuff that needs to be praised in terms of what he's set up with Judd Brackett and the amateur scouting department. That I would say his strength. But his weakness has definitely been more on the pro side with player acquisitions.
Yeah, free agent signings is definitely his weakest point.
Yeah, and there's a few trades there too where the exchange there is leaving people scratching their heads a little bit. But both on trades and free agent signings, I mean, if you're feeling the pressure to make moves, whether that's from the public, the media, or ownership. If you're being kind of pressured into making deals that you may not really want to make anyways, then you're going to start to see some poor deals there, and we see that with all general managers. But the question is his drafting making up for that? I think everybody has a different view on that.
Well, this is the tweet that Sean messaged because this was in response to JD Burke's. Overall lack of prospect depth is a result of 5 years of trading away picks. From 2014 to 2018, Toronto has had 42 picks. Vancouver's had 34. Of Toronto's 42, only 6 players have played games in the NHL. Of Vancouver's 34, 10 have played games. And he's pointed out, it's Ian Lusher that brought this up. T.O.'s drafting has been extremely bad. Only player outside of first round that has remotely made an impact is Travis Dermott in the second round. Vancouver's had a few hits, got at Forsling and Tramkin. It's hard to say that Forsling and Tramkin are making an impact when they're not on the roster. And I've found players like first Besser and McCann, although McCann is playing very well in Pittsburgh, it's, I guess, a good point. He also says picked up Demko a high second. T.O.'s draft hoarding strategy has done nothing to help their rebuild because Riley, Kadri, JVR, Bozek, and Kessel were already there and not at a prime. So I guess in terms of where this guy is coming from, Vancouver's drafting isn't terrible. And I mean, he also goes on to point out that Vancouver won a lottery in getting Austin Matthews. I mean, they didn't really win the lottery, but they got a first pick. And they were able to get Frederick Anderson in a trade, right? So, and John Tavares, obviously. So that obviously is why they put him ahead. But
well, I guess one of the questions you have to ask here too of the players that the Canucks drafted that played in the NHL. I mean, how many of those only got a small number of games and aren't playing anymore? And I have to dig into that a little deeper, I think.
Yeah, that's true too. Because I mean, it's simple to say that someone has played a game, but someone making a legitimate impact, I think, is different to me.
But that's the other thing is how many players, because the Leafs have added a lot of those extra picks that the Leafs added were 5th and 6th and 7th round picks, right? So how much does adding one or two more of those late round picks really swing the odds of you getting a NHL player who can play regular minutes versus someone who's just going to end up, say, toiling in the AHL at the very best? Because when you look at it, in each of those late rounds, you're lucky the league is lucky to see 2 or 3 of those players play in the NHL at that point. So adding one more draft pick in those late rounds doesn't necessarily change the actual odds of you getting a player to add to your roster from that. I think there is a good opportunity to add picks and stuff for asset reasons, and I think that's one thing that is missed in that thread of tweets is that some of those picks that they picked up they ended up swapping for NHL players later on. But in terms of what the Canucks have done, the first few years of the drafting wasn't that great. They got a couple hits, like the Demko, the Gaudette, Tramp, played a couple season and a half. But lately, they definitely look to have a little bit more. They seem to have a bit more success with. Like I said, Madden's looking good. You've got Cole Lind and Gadjevich who are playing as really young AHLers and they look like they're starting to figure things out. So I think it's patience. The Canucks fans need to have patience with the drafting, and they don't necessarily need to hammer on the continue to acquire picks for the acquiring picks sake.
And as far as the two teams' different trajectories, like you have to consider, like Toronto's far more successful right now. So of course their draft picks of the past couple years are not going to have as strong of a chance. Just like the guys that the Canucks drafted in 2008, 2009 probably weren't going to make that 2010, 2011 season. So the draft picks that the Canucks have had the past couple years are going to have better chances at making the NHL or at least getting a look.
Yeah, but in terms of like any of those players in the third rounds or later, it's always a bit more of I think that comes down to scouting as opposed to being just higher up in the draft, because there's just at that point you're looking at players who have issues, and it's all about what you see in a player more than their current skill. So I think the Canucks have done a lot better, despite the fact that they have been drafting higher than the Leafs, because I think it's a little more of a lottery once you get into those mid to late rounds.
Yeah, I mean, Johnny Gaudreau was a later round pick. And Pavel, that comes down to scouting and a little bit of luck there too. But even, the draft is a bit of luck in a lot of ways. I mean, Austin Matthews may not have turned out. Connor McDavid may not. I mean, Alexander Daigle was expected to be an absolute superstar in the NHL. He never turned out. There's a lot of players that just simply don't turn out. I mean, there's a bit of luck to how someone drafts. I mean, obviously there's scouting and research that comes in there, but it's not. There's some luck that plays in that a little bit as well.
Absolutely. Look at the first overall pick that was picked before the Sedins.
That's right.
Patrick Steffen.
Yeah, I had to kind of wait, who was that?
Yeah. That's why I didn't mention his name.
Yeah, Ray Ferraro's favorite.
Yeah. So in terms of games played, here's some of the top 5 fourth-round picks. I just pulled this up that have played games in the NHL. Keith Yandel, Ryan Callahan, Nicholas Chalmers, Craig Smith, TJ Brody. I think the highest points guy, is Yandel at 521. There's some like J.B. Peugeot. There's Tobias Reeder. There's Johnny Gaudreau, Justin Falk, Ben Sherratt. There is some pretty solid players there, but other than Gaudreau, it's really hard to find someone that is an absolute superstar in this league. Like Victor Mete, on and off, Brett Kulak, on and off in the NHL. So, and I'm just looking at fourth rounders. Philip Grubauer is a backup in the NHL. It's really hard to find someone that's going to be a forever superstar as a fourth round pick or on. So
yeah, you're looking at depth players more than anything else after the first round. In all honesty, and if you get anything more, then you're laughing.
Yeah, Datsuk is really like a lottery win, or someone even like Jannik Hansen isn't on the same level, obviously, but getting someone that late is pretty much the equivalent of winning the 649.
Yeah. I mean, even in the NFL, how many players were picked ahead? Tom Brady, right? So, that's a lottery pick, turns out, right? So, I don't know. I think yeah, some patience there. But what do you think is, in your opinion, what was Benning's best move?
Can we say getting Josh Levo?
That was mine.
Yeah. I know it's more of a recent move to kind of remember, but in terms of who won the trade, I think that one's pretty definitive.
Yeah, I would say Josh Levo is definitely the best pro player acquisition that he's made, and it's not even close. Which says a lot.
I have to agree.
Yeah. Berchi may be a good second, but unfortunately he's not playing right now. But yeah, it's hard. It's hard. In terms of trade, I do think that needs to be I do agree with you. Hopefully that changes, but it's not much there. But I guess we'll see going forward on that. While we're at it, where are we with Travis Green? How many years do we want to give this guy?
I think he's on the same sort of timeline as Jim Benning. You look at, I think he's done some good stuff in terms of helping Brock Besser, Jake Virtanen, Nikolai Goldobin develop. But I think there's still some question marks. I don't know if it's him or maybe it's a Newell Brown thing, but the way the Canucks enter the zone on the power play, the way they set up on the power play, the way they set up on the offensive zone on 5-on-5 leaves a lot to be desired.
Well, hello all and welcome.
Yeah, I'm of the same opinion as Sean in the sense that now would also not be the time, but I'm not 100% sold on him as a long-term coach either. There's inconsistencies there that you definitely would want to see improved on.
I wonder, if the team progresses and they get closer to being an actual playoff team and everything, how he handles players. Like it kind of feels to me like Green's trying a one-size-fits-all sort of way of handling his players. And I don't know how well that works when you start getting some bigger personalities in there, and the chances of winning are a lot better. I mean, right now when you've got a team with no superstars on it, and other than Pettersson, and he's new, I think it's easy for him to play the tough love approach and sit guys and this and that. But I don't know how well that's going to work. Say 3 or 4 years down the road.
But our guest today actually, it's going to be interesting. On the other, just because I'm curious what you think, because the previous GM before was Mike Gillis, obviously got the team to the Cup. What was his best move? He is the president of Red.
Gillis's best move?
Yeah, because the drafting, Chris was right. The drafting there wasn't exactly stellar, but what was his best move? How are you?
Ooh,
doing well, thanks. How are you?
Good. And then
I think bringing in Dan Hughes as a free agent was probably the best move because it just allowed their defense to slot into better spots and them to be a little more comfortable playing the minutes that they were.
I'm going to go with Christian Ehrhoff. I think that was the one that really gave them a legitimate power play in the playoffs. And then once he was gone, it just wasn't the same.
Yeah, as far as the team that he brought to the Stanley Cup final, I would have to say Ehrhoff is probably the biggest deal. But if we're talking about potential gifts for the next GM, I would have to say getting Horvat or the 9th pick for Schneider actually was probably pretty smart as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Future.
Even though no one liked it at the moment.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was certainly a surprise. Like, wait, you met Roberto Luongo, Gary, right? No, it was Cordy. Yeah. You spelled Roberto Luongo wrong.
I think you're going to want to hear this.
Yeah, classic. One of the best things going. Let's go on to some other NHL things. And so Mitch Milani from the Bottom Line View and I often chat because we often talk about the NFL, and we chat a little bit about the NHL because he helps out on John Vivero's Hot Take Hockey because they both go to Ryerson. And Mitch is always reminding us through the NFL free agency all the players that are about to sign with the New England Patriots, which is apparently the entire NFL. They only visit New England and they somehow sign elsewhere, but New England's in on everything. But anyway, he's a Pittsburgh Penguins fan, and he always reminds us to when Pittsburgh is winning. And he pointed something out about that Pittsburgh is in for a long, deep Cup run. Which led me to think, like, really? Because we're assuming it's Tampa Bay. Or, like, Pittsburgh could be facing Tampa Bay in the first round, possibly.
One of the most important things is,
are we underestimating the Pittsburgh Penguins?
You have some culpability or some.
I think there's more teams that are a little more exciting than the Penguins at this point, which a lot of people are focusing on. But they're a team that you can't sleep on when you've got Crosby, Malkin up the middle. They've made some smart moves to acquire Nick Bukestad and Jared McCann. And don't forget about you can list the players that are on their roster on and on and on. And when Matt Murray's on, he's about as good a goaltender as you can get. So I don't think there is a real. I don't think there's a real reason to sleep on them, other than the fact that there's other teams that are getting the focus because of where they are, aka Toronto, Boston, and what they did at the deadline, Columbus.
Yeah, Columbus is in such a precarious position. It's going to be so fascinating what happens if they don't make the playoffs, or even if they do. It's so intriguing.
Pittsburgh 7-1-2 in their last 10 games, so they're heating up at the right time.
Prime Minister was responding from a place of.
You mean Columbus? You mean or Pittsburgh?
Or
Pittsburgh.
Yeah,
it was really
they are. And I still think 87 is the best player in this game. Sorry, Oiler fans, I just do. I think that's been proven. But what other thoughts are there out there?
And it was very staged too. I mean, if you look at it, he walked out with his daughter and with.
It's such a tight league, so like I can totally see them making a run with
he had
the things fall the right way. They get a couple bounces, maybe get the right first round matchup.
With the image of Trudeau as a feminist,
I could definitely see them making a run, but it's so tight in the East specifically. If we look at the standings,
4 years in terms of not being able to live up to his own hype.
You've got right now they would be playing the Islanders in the first round, so that's definitely a matchup that they could walk in and take it quicker than a lot of people would expect if you just looked at the stands at the point totals.
And then they got Washington, which they have beaten most of the time.
Yeah.
And Tampa, I know they're 54-13-4, and God love them, but they've only been. You never know, eh?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, part of
the Penguins have the firepower to play with
around MP Cantera and my experiences, and then having basically
if that's what they matchup they end up with. So, but I don't think they're going to end up with that. They're 4 points up on both Carolina and Columbus, who are the wild card team. So it looks more like they're going to be battling with.
That there is not only
the Islanders, and maybe even if they can stay hot, they still have a chance to win the division too.
Line up with that.
Yeah, they're 4 points back. It's definitely looking like they're going to be in that Metropolitan Division bracket. The thing is, when you get to the third round, it's attrition by that point. Injuries starts to mess around with teams' plans. So I don't know. I mean, I'm always a believer in Pittsburgh's depth. They always seem to be able to plug in some other guys and keep going. No reason to be down on Pittsburgh. Tampa Bay, though, geez, if they don't make the Stanley Cup final this year, what a disappointment that'll be.
That would be something to talk about for sure.
Yeah, I kind of agree with
Chris, what do you think?
To be honest.
Yeah, I would never count Pittsburgh out of it.
I have no doubt.
But at the same time, I'm not sure if they have the firepower to make it past maybe the Eastern final.
And that
I don't see him in the Cup final this season, but that's just my take.
A vision of what feminism looks
like. But like Noble said, do not count Tampa Bay out of it either. They need to make that Stanley Cup final this season because they're overperforming.
Don't necessarily match the words, and
it's been well over 10 years that a President's Trophy winner has won a Stanley Cup,
and it's not really rooted in
which is
genuine behaviors.
Absolutely mind-blowing. That is crazy.
It's easy to call yourself.
So you guys, I'm curious here. We kind of talked about this in the chat, so I thought I just would quickly bring this up before we go on to the next topic. Do you remember that time that you heard the head coach of the Canucks or Daniel and Henrik Sedin talk about disrespecting an opponent?
Cantera is still in caucus. You see again his behavior of these issues around
blank here.
I don't also recall Jerome McGinley or the Flames coaching staff at any point saying that they disrespected an opponent. So how did the Edmonton Oilers, who were not in a playoff spot, prepare for the New Jersey Devils, who that's not a great team? Let's be honest, it's not the team on the ice is not a great team. They have some pieces that are injured. How does a leadership group and a coaching staff in a playoff run, playoff battle, there's kind of still in it, disrespect an opponent? How?
She very much believes in.
Can someone explain that to me?
And I totally respect that. But one of the things that has come up,
I don't know. I don't understand how they think they're still in the playoff run.
Trudeau,
they are 8 points out.
Kind of in a sense,
with 12 games to play.
Defending a Trudeau,
but
get off the
I don't know. I think it just shows how much of a mess they are up there in Edmonton, and how I think there's some players up there that just don't have the mental game to be successful, to be winners. They're just collecting a paycheck and going home.
Being a performance
I think it's a cultural thing for sure.
Anything to do with her performance, that would have come up before.
I don't know. I mean, maybe they're starting to run low on gas. They look at New Jersey and think it shouldn't be too hard. Then they got I don't know how many road games they have, but they're on the road tonight against Arizona. I don't understand that either. I mean, how can you be looking past anybody when you're not in the playoffs? I don't get that.
Then they would have
somehow Edmonton still finds ways to surprise people on how they can
embarrass themselves. That's the other thing. Is what's lost in this is this conversation around.
It's true. It's something. It's quite fascinating to me how they do that.
Difficult to work with, or a performance issue, why put her in a
but
position
Connor McDavid has his points, and from that end, everything is hunky dory, and the fans are still going and turning in the Stars fouls and making Daryl Cates some money. So
supporters both.
Maybe they're okay with what's going on in Edmonton. I don't know. It seems like ownership doesn't really.
There was some concerns with the performance of Jody Wilson as the Justice Minister.
Yeah, I mean, what is okay to an Edmonton Oilers fan?
Politics is perception
keep going to the games.
Just the same as some people are criticizing.
Why? Is it because of McDavid? Is it because the building's new? Is it because there's not very much to do in Edmonton? Maybe it's all those things. I don't know. But if you really want to get
so bad at the job previously, why would you give
that's what happens in Vancouver when it grabs the owner's attention.
Why would you make that decision when push came to shove for a potential
like in
DPA
Vancouver, it went from like what a 4 or 6 year
wait
to get on 2 season tickets.
Even if there isn't
them like having a fire sale,
truth to the matter that they are trying to push a DPA.
Yeah, I mean now you can easily outside of like a game against Toronto
out of the position,
you can easily
lends credence to the perception that there is some interference going on, and then the subsequent admission by the new Justice Minister that was one of the first things discussed in his mandate meeting. Definitely gives credibility to Wilson Raybold's belief that was part of the reason for moving forward.
And if they genuinely did.
I'm going to disagree with you just a little bit there, and I say this from a Flames perspective. I will give the Oiler fan credit for this. They hang with that team through thick and thin. There is no question about it.
Well, I think with him coming forward,
I tweeted about this
strategically and politically.
I thought it was absolutely embarrassing that a first-place team competing for a Stanley Cup got absolutely run over by Maple. I get that the Maple Leafs travel very well.
Really runs the risk of
that to
pouring more
me,
gasoline on
the
this fire
Flames, out of all of the three teams in Western Canada, and I say this as a Flames supporter, I think the Flames at times come across one of the most bandwagon fan bases in the NHL. Or out of this group. I think the Canuck fans, I've seen them go through thick and thin and say, okay, we'll still support this team. I see downtown, there's still Canuck jerseys walking to the game. Maybe the seats are empty right now. Oiler fans are loyal, but the Flame fans, there has been a history of inconsistency with that.
To be respectful and to listen and act the same way with him as they did.
I think one thing you have to look at though is that when the tickets went on sale,
very clearly
at the beginning of the season,
it feels like there's a
did anyone really expect the Flames to be this good?
Who knew? That's a fair point. I get that. Yeah, it's. But it just for me, it's just like shocking. But it's very. And I know that they dominate. I know the Leaf fans were all excited because this has probably been the best team in a while. I just was like, this is so painful for me to watch. Like, it's just.
The visual too, right? Like the sea of red is so prominent. Like you don't see that really anywhere else in the NHL. That consistent look of the red in the seats, and then you get a game against Toronto, and there's all this blue there.
In my opinion,
I mean, this is the same in all the Western Canadian
it feels like
situations.
Real,
when the tickets go on sale, the fans that want to catch that one Toronto game scoop up the tickets right away.
Why didn't you do this? And it's understandable. They're a popular team. I'm not saying that anything about that. I just wish that the Flame fans just turned up a little bit more.
Well,
that's all.
Like most things, I don't think it's
the
quite black
Flames
and white.
fans, especially in the lower bowl.
So one of the things that Jody Wilson-Raybould talks about and references is
it's getting better,
a
but
concept
it has
called
been
the
for
shot
years.
cross
Such a white collar,
principle,
quiet
which
business
basically states both
atmosphere
that
that
an auditor or not
when
auditors,
the Go Leafs go chance
Attorney General / Justice Minister, if they feel that there has been political interference or undue political pressure, that they have a responsibility to resign and
Vancouver always
to
to
publicly
a lot
criticize and
more
go after the Prime Minister and their leadership. Now,
showing
obviously,
cheering
Wilson-Raybould
on their
felt very
team.
strongly that the prosecution of
like the lower bowl, the dome is a lot
and
more
I
corporate.
think that you do
kind of
need
very
to
similar
take
in
her at her
in
word
terms
that she
to
felt
Rogers Arena in
that she
Vancouver.
had
Like,
done an
they
adequate
both have
job
very
of
quiet,
pushing off that
lower
political
bowls
pressure,
that
and
are
that
not
she was
very, I guess,
going
into
to
the
be
game.
able to see
But I
this
will
case
give the
through to
Calgary
completion
fans
and to the
the
outcome
Calgary
that she
lower bowl
believes should
people some
occur,
credit
which
in the
is
sense that
an
they
actual trial
wear jerseys
on the
more
charges
consistently.
that have been leveled against them.
Well,
so
they probably
I
could
don't think
afford
it's
them.
quite as black and white as some
But,
people would
yeah,
have believed. I do think that there was pressure.
No, you're right. Yeah.
In her own words, she does say that she doesn't think necessarily that the Prime Minister or the people in the Privy Council office or
totally get it.
the staff have done anything illegal. She does feel that they were skirting that line. But the thing that stood out for me is that
I'm going to read this for
political considerations, economic considerations,
and this was
can and
a
should be
really
part
great
of the
article
discussion,
from
but
The
they need
Athletic
to be occurring
about
prior
Jamie
to
Baker.
a decision being made
I'll
on
just
whether
read
or
a little
not
bit
to
about this.
pursue prosecution. And once the Department of Public Prosecutions
throughout the game,
had
Baker
formally made that decision, that's when the political
commentary of his
pressure and
play-by-play
political
partner
discussions
Randy Hall.
should have stopped.
He
And
diagrammed
that's
a
what makes this
skate and play with
inappropriate,
Thomas Hurdle
is she
on the
had
Sharks
made
penalty
very,
kill.
very clear
Noting where he
to
switches with a teammate to
everybody
aid a
who
puck
approached
clearing
her
attempt.
that
He
she
adds
was firm
cheerfully
that
about the
that was the
beautiful
correct
details
course of
of
action.
Detroit's new Little
And
Caesars
so
arena,
in pushing
and
back
jokes
and
about
drawing that
renowned
line in
hockey
the sand, that's
Deerwood,
where the line was
Minnesota, that
crossed,
is
was
said to
that
be
there continued to be
For this game,
concerted
on
effort
January
from
31st,
chiefs of
2018,
staff, from
he's
the
clad in
principal
a sharp
secretary,
blue suit,
from the
orange
finance
shirt,
minister's
patterned tie,
staff,
and
from the Privy
austere
Council
pocket
and
sweat.
Michael Wernick.
His analysis
And
seems
so
easy
that's
and
where the
effortless.
lines were
His
crossed.
demeanor
And
upbeat.
certainly, if it wasn't
At
illegal,
the start of the third
sounds to
period,
me
he
like
discusses
it
the
was unethical.
superlative play from Sharks
Well, and I
goaltender
think the other
Martin
part of
Jones,
this,
who held a
and I
buzzing
think to go
Detroit
back a
squad
little bit,
scoreless
to
through the first
remember
40
how
minutes.
Jody Wilson-Raybould
There
got
is
involved in
nothing
politics to
to
begin
suggest
with.
to viewers
She was a
or to
chief
those
in
around
BC.
him that
She
anything
became
is
part of
amiss.
this as part of
But
the
during the
contingent of chiefs that came to
second
Ottawa for
intermission,
the I Don't Know More
Baker made a
conversations.
decision to both
She really came
urgency
into the
and
political
permanence.
realm wanting
He
to
pulled
affect
out his
change.
phone, booked a
So,
flight home to
very
California,
likely when she
and
was
resumed
looking
his
at
day's
the
work
options of
as
what
if
she was
nothing
going
was
to do
wrong.
when she found
In
out that she
those
was going to
20
be
minutes
removed as
between the
Attorney
periods,
General, she still
Jamie
probably
Baker
wanted to, like
decided
all
to end
politicians do
his
when
life.
they initially get elected, to make
So
change,
Jamie Baker
to
this
create
week,
change for her community and for the
he
things
got
that
a little
matter
bit
to
of
her.
play. It got
So I don't
probably
blame her at all
sidetracked
for
by a
wanting
number
to
of other
stay
things,
and
but I
wanting
did want to
to
bring
look at whether or not there was
this
an opportunity
because he
to
was
affect
very
change
courageous
still in her
this week.
community.
Not only
But
with
and
the
she has not
Athletic
been
with Katie String,
granted
but
a waiver
doing a
privilege
number
to
of
communicate
interviews of
what
where
happened
he
after
has
she got
been and
moved.
what he has
So we
been
don't know at this point what led to
through
her
in the
decision
last
to actually resign
and we've
as
talked a
Minister
lot,
for Veterans
a little bit
Affairs,
here about
but
mental
something
health.
obviously had to
Sean
happen in
made
that
some
period
points
of
about what
time that
happened
led
at
to
the
that
Duke
initially,
in
but she probably
Calgary,
still went into that
and this
portfolio
was
with the
another
circumstances.
reminder to me about the
And
importance
I think there was a little bit
this
of naivety on the part of the Prime Minister
and what Jamie Baker
when
went
he said,
through. So
if Jody
did you guys have a
Wilson-Raybould
chance to
didn't
see
have
that article
confidence
or
in myself as Prime
see
Minister
the video? Or
in
I think
the
Tyler
course
was
of
the one
action
that
we've
pointed this
taken,
out to me.
she would have stepped down. And the fact that she
actually
stepped
saw
down
his
the next day, I think that's really telling as
when
to
the Sharks
where
were
her
Winnipeg.
head
They
was
did a
at
segment between
and
periods there, and
the level of
he's obviously quite
trust
emotional
and
trying to
belief
talk about
in
the whole
Prime
going
Minister
public
and
with his
his
mental
team.
struggles
Well, and
thing,
the other
and then
part
I
of
did
this
read
too
the
is
Katie
that
Strang
every
article as
single
well.
thing that has come out of the Liberal
It's just
camp
another reminder of how you never really know what's going on inside people's
of workplace harassment.
And in sports,
to say, okay, well, you're being bullied, go talk to the person who's bullying you and tell them to stop. Oh, you should just quit. Oh, you should. None of that is what you're supposed to do in situations of workplace bullying. And that's what, if you really just want to drill this down to its most simplistic elements, that's what this is.
There's guys there that
exactly. And anybody that has been through a hard time
with
the
pressure. Obviously, Jamie Baker, when he was a player, had to really work hard to maintain his spot. Probably had a lot of insecurity about losing his spot.
Fine, and the next day
that
it's not. So you're in your head, you're going through this process. It's not so easy for me to say, "Oh, she should have resigned," or "She should have done this and that." It's easy to say that looking out, but when you're in this, and you're right, I think that she has some
for Jamie, and this wasn't talked about. I mean, Jamie Baker was replacing Drew Remenda when Drew Remenda was
that's another thing. Sorry, just to interject. I really hate
that's another
that the
pressure
media
point for a guy like Jamie
to go to
to
her
have
dad
a high
or any other male figure around her to give her some sense of credence. Like, oh, see, her dad said this. She doesn't need a male figure to speak for her. She's perfectly capable of speaking for herself. And I don't think that we need to continue to rely on interviews with her dad, who in and of itself, he's a chief. He did incredible work in BC, especially fighting, ironically, the Trudeau government on their position on the white paper and what they wanted to do in terms of getting rid of treaties. But he isn't her, and I think we need to start. We as the broader we need to stop having conversations about her that automatically brings in the men around her to give her positions of value.
It doesn't matter. You still feel like
I wonder if that's in part because here in BC he's such an easy
living up to what you want as a person, let alone anyone else.
He's been everywhere.
So, but the more people,
I'm not disagreeing with you,
talk about it, the better, because it will help.
Like one of the things that I was taken away that he said,
make it easier for
I'm learning a little bit more about is just
come
the
out
value system.
And talk about it.
I do appreciate
whether it is friends, family, or professional help, whatever they need.
So I guess that's where we're getting that value. But I think that her value system of what she wants to do and what her motivation.
Yeah, I'm in full agreement. I don't have that much more to add.
It's not as easy as I'm just going to quit. There's more to this than what is meeting the eye.
The less the stigma is going to be, and the better we can help each other.
So one of the other controversies, we'll get into the other political parties, but one of the things that is coming out, and Heather, I feel like Heather Malik is one of the key people. There's a bunch. Tyler. I saw a little bit when it was flipping around the TV. What has happened here is that
Tyler
big
pointed
of a
out
that it's just it was the risk of it's just an important reminder about what's happened here to get jobs.
Yeah.
It's a small price to pay
for so many reasons. I agree.
What
I think it's so
with
important,
Huawei,
especially
out here in BC.
in the media world, in the social media world, where
big deal? Is there some contradiction?
Someone makes some sort of mistake. We want, especially
I think it is a big deal, and certainly China has some vested interest in trying to embarrass Trudeau into interfering and letting Meng Wanzhou
we don't understand the mental impact of that have on somebody. Like
fundamentally, when you look at this, it is a matter of rule of law, and the deferred prosecution agreement is new legislation in Canada. It was just passed and implemented in the fall of 2018. And so it definitely seems like there's an element of political interference and a desire to protect a beloved Quebec company. Granted, one that's widely acknowledged to be a fairly corrupt one as well.
It was supposed to be a
flu. There's similar legislation to this in the majority of the Western world.
That's a big loss.
But I would challenge and argue whether there's value in having it, because what you're really doing is you're saying to big corporations and to C-level executives that it's okay to commit white-collar crime because, you'll just send in the legal team and we'll negotiate your way out of it under the guise of protecting jobs in the economy.
Chris,
so I think as a society, we do need to take a look at, does this type of legislation make sense? Do these type of agreements make sense? And why do we have them? And should there be a different set of rules for corporations and businesses versus, Joe Canada? Because if we were to
employed or
bribing people and paying people off, you can bet your butt that we would be facing criminal charges and there would be no special agreement for us.
Well, and I think I have 3 points to make on this. I mean, firstly, over the last couple of months, everything's going on between Canada and China around Huawei, and then you have their foreign affairs ministry tweeting out, "Oh, I thought Trudeau believed in the rule of law," and that's been his rationale for not interfering in this particular case. So when we're getting owned by China on Twitter, that's probably not a very good sign for us. Secondly, what is consistently forgotten in this conversation is SNC-Lavalin is basically like LexCorp. Like, you're talking about an organization that procured prostitutes for the Gaddafis, that built torture chambers in Libya. They are not this, good little organization that made one little mistake and let's give them some space there. That is not the case whatsoever. So, and there are a lot of other really good engineering companies out there that have not done those things. So maybe we could put our energy into those. And then thirdly, I don't think there is any Albertan, regardless of where you stand on the issues of the pipeline, who didn't get some visceral reaction to hearing Trudeau talk about jobs and how important it is to save 8,000 jobs in the province of Quebec, when we have not seen that same commitment in this province around whether it's TMX or whether it's anything else in terms of his commitment to this province and jobs here. That does not exist.
Yeah, it's a valid point. Well, first of all, your point about Gaddafi, let's not forget what this guy did. This is not a nice human being. They have committed some really horrible things, this should not, and that should not be passed. I totally agree with that. And the Alberta thing is very I know that some people are going to sit here and say, well, Alberta is feeling entitled, and Alberta this, and Alberta, the fact of the matter is, and you guys know this more than me because you're living there, it's tough right now. There are a lot of people that are unemployed that maybe were employed. It is tough to get work. It's tough to, downtown Calgary is a shell of what it was. Although you're living in Edmonton, it's not easy for a lot of Albertans right now. So to hear Quebec, people in Quebec, or Justin Trudeau doing this about 9,000 jobs in Quebec. If I'm an Albertan, yeah, you're right. I don't think you have to sit on one side of the fence or the other to feel a little bit of what are you thinking here? Seriously, it feels wrong.
Well, again, it just goes against everything that Justin Trudeau campaigned on. But if you look at the reality between campaigning in 2015 to what he has done as a government now, we still sell arms to Saudi Arabia. So we are not exactly sitting there as moral authorities on what we do and do not with government policy. And SNC-Lavalin is just one more example of that.
Okay. Robbie, did you have anything to add to that?
Yeah, well, I'll acknowledge I was born and grew up in BC. I know, sacrilege. But I've been an Albertan for 24 years now, and I'm an Albertan by choice. I love it here, and it's given me a lot of opportunity. I'll acknowledge, though, that Trudeau, yes, he bought a pipeline. Yes, he's done some things to support Albertans who haven't been working. But when you look at the way he has allegedly, according to the testimony of Jody Wilson-Raybould, twisted himself into knots to protect 8,000 jobs in Quebec and bringing up an impending election and how important it is that SNC-Lavalin is there. Whereas when it's come down to supporting energy infrastructure for Alberta, it feels a little bit like he's had to be dragged to that position and he hasn't willingly done it. Whereas in this case, he's really been very proactive in going after that opportunity and the political opportunity that represents. And so for me, that's where there's this bit of cognitive dissonance and why I think a lot of Albertans are feeling really chapped about this situation.
And there's already a section of Albertans that don't like Trudeau, no matter what he does anyway. So that just
it wouldn't matter if he was giving out free cars.
That exactly. Last name doesn't resonate with some people, no matter what.
Yeah. So it's just not hurting. It's not helping him in any way, shape, or form, or helping
But that's the problem. Is I think that he, whether rightly or wrongly, sees he has 3 seats in Alberta. They have a huge seat selection in Quebec and in Ontario, and that's what they push towards, because he doesn't see this as a winnable province for him. So I think to some extent, why would he make us a priority?
Yeah. And on that front, I think that's where sometimes Albertans shoot themselves in the foot by being so loyal to the Conservatives, is sometimes your political clout is diminished by our election almost always being fait accompli. It's going to be a Conservative majority. There's not a lot of incentive for a Liberal government to do things that politically support us.
Well, and then he also, I mean, not to take this completely off the rails in terms of discussion, but then he also is basically sacrificing Amarjeet Sohi by making him the minister in charge of Trans Mountain. And, you know, for Amarjeet, he was a very well-liked, well-respected politician. You hand him a file like that, that's political suicide in a lot of ways. So, you know, there needs to be a consideration on Trudeau's part about the way he plays his MPs. And for the exception of what happened in the last few days, Randy Bosno should have been in cabinet from day one. So it's moves that he makes, it doesn't resonate well, I think, with the Alberta voters either.
Yeah. It's not easy, and I don't. He's not necessarily going to find it very easy out here, necessarily in BC either. He made some promises to the anti-pipeline people that they're not very happy either. So it's not going to be easy for him out west, no matter what, how he looks at it. I don't think.
Well, and I think it speaks a little bit to Trudeau's desire to be well liked versus being respected, and there's a much larger focus, I believe, on the image and a much smaller focus on the substance that goes with it. Yeah. And so I think that it's going to make a pathway to forming government again a lot harder for him.
And up until this point, I haven't been the hugest Jagmeet Singh cheerleader, but if there's any time for Jagmeet to stand up and shine, this is his opportunity now. You know, he will be in the House. He's won his seat, and he has been consistently much more reasoned in his approach to this than Andrew Scheer, in the sense of calling for an inquiry, not flat out asking for the Prime Minister to resign. This is his chance, and if he does have an opportunity, BC's wide open for him in terms of votes and opportunities there. So he's the person to watch coming out of this, because he has the most to gain. Because people are not necessarily going to go from being Liberal supporters to voting for their Conservative MP, but they could potentially, like they did previously in previous years under Jack Layton and the NDP, put their vote there for the time being. Yeah.
It's going to be. Yeah, that was kind of wanted to. Yeah, let's go there. Like we're starting with Jagmeet. It's. Congratulations on winning your seat, and look what you got here. And we have a present for you. Kind of the public inquiry. Like I do agree. I think there's some reasonable things coming out of there. I mean, on a side note, maybe he just doesn't talk about Venezuela at all. You just leave that alone, and you just focus on stuff like this. And I think that there is an underrated opportunity for the NDP. I think it's really sad that they're losing some really good people in that party, like Nathan Cullen. I don't think that hurts them, but I think, and what Nathan Cullen has done in this, I think, has been very, very good too. But yeah, I've seen the NDP. You maybe contrast what you're seeing from Singh and what Andrew Scheer's calling for a resignation, and how the Conservatives are handling this.
Yeah. For Andrew Scheer to run out hair on fire as soon as Wilson Raybould was done testifying and calling for resignation just seemed a little bit opportunistic and a little bit like an ambulance chaser. And obviously the Conservatives smell blood in the water and believe there's an opportunity here politically for them. But it did come across as really opportunistic. It came across as not having all the facts before they were jumping to conclusions. And politically, I think that this is probably going to wind up damaging Trudeau very much, and that it may wind up ending with him having to step down. But I think you have to have all the information first, and you can't be jumping to conclusions like that so quickly without hearing from all the stakeholders and all the people that have been involved and getting a fulsome picture in a nonpartisan and non-biased way.
I mean, that said, I heard Andrew Scheer on the Ryan Jesperson show, I think it was yesterday, the day before yesterday, and he actually came across much more reasoned and better spoken in that interview than he had in his press conference immediately after Jody Wilson-Raybould's testimony. I think this is a huge opportunity for both Jagmeet Singh and Andrew Scheer. Actually, ironically, Robbie and I were talking about this on the way before the podcast started, that Scheer has in some ways gone quite right in a way to combat Maxime Bernier. And I think this particular opportunity, for lack of a better word, is a chance for Scheer to come more center and bring the party more center in their messaging, and this is a chance for him to show Canadians what he would be if he was their prime minister, because ultimately he is the other option. Like, I don't think anyone, except for very passionate NDPers, believe that there's any other option other than between Justin Trudeau and Andrew Scheer. So this is an opportunity for Scheer to do that and to show us what kind of a measured leader he can be, which is exactly what Stephen Harper did during the sponsorship scandal. And it is what made people, I think, feel comfortable giving him a minority government.
Yeah, it's very, very parallel in that sense. I just, I worry about that because I don't know if I feel like maybe it's the whole perception, but I feel like Scheer is afraid to go to the middle. I feel like he's catering to the right part of the conservative base, and if he loses that, he's going to lose his leadership. And I feel like his leadership is tenuous at best anyway.
I think people say that, but I mean, the reality is now that Max has his People's Party and does all his ridiculous nonsense, he can take those ridiculous people. Like, I don't think the Conservative Party want people who believe that the UN is going to take over Canada in 10 years, which is what Maxime Bernier said today. I think you have people within the party like Lisa Raitt, Michelle Rempel, people who have traditionally been more center. I think that conservative parties all across the board play to the right before the election and then played at the center in the general. If you look at what Harper did with that party, it was the exact same thing. He ran a center party. He did not run the right-wing party that a lot of people, I think, even wanted in terms of social conservatism and in terms of the way that he went with a lot of things. He was pretty centery. He was pretty close to what a Paul Martin government would have looked like as well. So I don't know if we need to necessarily be afraid of Andrew Scheer, but I think this is this opportunity for him to address those kind of fears that you and I'm sure a lot of other people, and I know Twitter does, have around him and what he may do.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And if I was advising Scheer, I would really be focusing on having him come across as being prime ministerial, being the reasoned level head. And because you do have Maxime Bernier peeling off some of those more extreme right-wing people, this is an opportunity for the Conservatives to pick up the blue liberal vote that has been with Justin Trudeau, but do want a little bit more fiscal sanity, that do want a little bit more focus on smaller government, but are socially progressive, because those are the people that are more likely to come to the Conservatives versus going to Jagmeet Singh, who is quite left-wing on matters of the environment and economics.
I like to refer to it as the Joe Clark vote.
Yes. It's fair to bring in Joe Clark in a podcast.
I like to bring him into all things.
Yes, all things. Yes. You love Joe Clark. Yes.
Yeah.
Joe Clark is Kristen's every Man Crush Monday.
It's true.
It's
accurate.
True. Yeah.
In a normal way.
Oh, that's fair. I'm not going to judge. I think you're right. I see where you're coming from. We missed Joe Clark. You pinned it. Yeah.
Yeah.
What like we talked a little bit. I mean, Jagmeet's not going to form government, but he's got a lot going against him though too, in the sense that he's not really well known. I know that there are some NDP folks that are concerned that he's not going to get a fair shake, unfortunately, because of who he is. If you're advising Jagmeet, what do you say?
find a time machine, go back 18 months and run in a by-election so Canadians can get to know you. I think with Jagmeet, the problem is that he's just seemed so passive, and he hasn't been able to articulate a clear vision for what the NDP looks like under his leadership. And so not having the profile of being in the House of Commons, not being active enough in building his profile, and even just, you referenced Venezuela earlier, not being able to take a clear position and articulate it, and he's been a little bit wishy-washy, and that hasn't helped his cause at all.
Well, and to build off of that, there's no caucus loyalty. You have him tweeting out something and then Nikki Ashton tweeting out something disagreeing with him. There has been issues with party loyalty, for lack of a better word, around his decision to kick Aaron Weir out of caucus, which, by the way, is one of my preferred decisions that Jagmeet Singh has made in terms of his consistency on issues around sexual harassment. It shows a lot more courage around this issue than our Prime Minister has shown. But that is a big issue. Like, again, you can't go 18 months back in time to be able to control things. All you can do now moving forward is, I think, what he did the other day. He's been consistent. He's been clear. In the last couple of days, I've gained a lot more respect for Jagmeet Singh and the way that he's come across and handled this situation. And so I think we just have to see now moving forward what the party's going to do. But what they also have to do is get out there and start recruiting some damn star candidates, because they've lost Murray Rankin, they've lost Nathan Cullen. In Alberta, they've lost Linda Duncan. They really need to start ensuring that who they are running in the next election are capable of winning those seats back for them.
Yeah. There's a small minority of them, but I guess we should ask, what about Elizabeth May? Because if you're doomed with the NDP, like, if you don't want to go to the Liberals, maybe the Green Party is a better fit. Is there an opportunity here? Or
I think there is, and I think if you look at the last British Columbia election, I think if you look at the current polling in PEI, you're seeing non-traditional parties starting to have a bigger influence on politics. And I would argue to a certain extent it actually started in Saskatchewan under Brad Wall. But you're starting to see parties that don't necessarily fit in the traditional left-right paradigm that are starting to pop up. And while I don't politically agree with a lot of Elizabeth May's stances, particularly around balancing environment and economic development, it's hard to argue that she has been a very effective legislator. She's been recognized numerous times as one of the best MPs in the House, and she works her butt off, and she's certainly knowledgeable. And even looking at her questioning of Jody Wilson-Raybould, it was measured, but it was articulate. It hit the right points, and so I do believe there is an opportunity for her if she puts together a good slate of candidates and they run broadly enough that they can pick up some of that more progressive / environmentalist vote.
Yeah, God bless Elizabeth May. I don't agree with probably much the same things that Robbie doesn't in terms of her political positions, but she was just voted the most ethical leader of a federal party. I think people like her. I think people respect her. There's no lying in Elizabeth May. She is who she is, and she's very, very, very honest about that. So I do think that this represents an opportunity for her. And you look even at the states, at the popularity of people like AOC and the Green New Deal and Bernie Sanders and all of these things. Elizabeth May speaks to the same people that would vote that way. So if she's able to coalesce her messaging, but also if she's able to get the kind of platform that is allotted to Jagmeet Singh and Andrew Scheer and Justin Trudeau, because again, what we see sometimes is she doesn't get invited to leadership debates, or she only gets invited to some. The national media doesn't cover her the same way. So I think it's really about her finding a platform and an opportunity to get her message out to people. If I was advising her, that's what I would be telling her to get on Twitter, get on Facebook, get on Instagram, be out there so people can see you, because the media will not give you that same privilege.
Yeah, it's true. Now, let's get to the social media. I want to get to the social media and the language that has been used around this. some of the comparisons here, some of the wording here. What are your thoughts on the social media conversation? It's hard. There is always going to be the partisans that are going to be partisan no matter what, and will take a side no matter what. But there's also, I respect both of you because you are nonpartisan on this, and you're not about the party line. You're about the actual issue. So can you guys talk about what you're seeing in the language there? What you would like to see more of? Kristen talked a little bit like we don't necessarily need to hear a male perspective kind of thing. Or Bill Wilson specifically's perspective, but kind of talk a little bit about the language a bit that you're seeing here and you'd like to hear more of.
My thing is I would really like it, and I think I said this on Twitter the other day, is if people would stop comparing political interference to sexual harassment and sexual assault and using that kind of language and consistently bringing in conversations. And this is obviously from a partisan perspective, I think, of conservatives, bringing in Gropergate and the incident that happened with Mr. Trudeau 20 years ago. That's not relevant to this conversation at all. Bringing that into this conversation, bringing that kind of gendered language into this conversation, it minimizes sexual assault and it also minimizes political interference. These are two very separate issues. And I think we need to start having those conversations and not using language that has been typically used to talk about sexual violence when we use her truth and all of these things for this. I think we need to really start. They are not the same thing. And that's something that I found frustrating on social media. I mean, social media is a dumpster fire regardless, but that part has been very frustrating to me.
See, and that's where I'm going to kind of disagree with Kristen. And certainly, there's a power structure in politics, and I think that that's where there is some similarity between the Gropergate thing and this situation. And the thing that really stuck out for me, and I think was a communications error on Trudeau's part when he had his press conference following Wilson Raybould's testimony was, well, she perceived it differently than I did. And so there's that kind of paternalistic insinuation there that Trudeau tends to rely on when things aren't going well for him. It's like, oh, well, that woman, that lady, that girl didn't perceive it the way that I did, so she must be wrong. And I think that that's a little bit problematic and kind of hints at that element or perception that Trudeau is kind of a bit of a superficial feminist, right? Because he supports women, he believes women, as long as those women aren't in a position of conflict with him. And so that's where I do see some similarities there.
I will give Robbie that. I will coalesce to his perspective on that.
I've seen some conservative people on my social media use the Me Too. And kind of there's this meme with Jody Wilson-Raybould with "I believe her." I'm not. I don't know how I feel about that. I feel a little bit uncomfortable about that. Just because I feel like they're taking a political opportunity, and it feels a little demeaning to what that conversation's all about. But maybe am I missing something there?
I mean, I don't feel like the hashtag #MeToo should be part of this conversation. Again, I think that while recognizing, like what Robbie said, is absolutely correct. It was a mistake on Trudeau's communications people's part to use the exact same language to describe Jody Wilson that he did to describe the incident at the Kokanee Music Festival. But no, like you can't, if you say hashtag I believe Jody, that's fine. But the Me Too stuff needs to stay out of this conversation because those are two very separate things. And again, I genuinely believe, from what I understand about the PMO and from what I've seen over the last couple of years, they would have done this to Jody Wilson-Raybould if she was a woman or she was a man. They wanted to get their way, period, the end.
Yeah, I agree with that.
There's the other part of this that I'm finding kind of fascinating is an old colleague of mine, Brett Manier, has brought it in my head, and I like this term. It's the whataboutisms. So one side does something, and what about what this did? And so a good example of this has been, well, Harper is no better, Scheer is no better. Like this whole whataboutism is kind of bothering me because I feel like it's almost like one side's justifying, oh, this is okay because the other party wouldn't have been done any better at this, or this is, it's kind of like almost like a shrug of the shoulder, and it's, oh yeah, well, whatever, right? You know,
and that's consistent. I mean, we see that in Alberta provincial politics right now quite a lot. That when political parties do things that are wrong, partisans' natural reaction is, okay, but what about this? We need to be able to acknowledge when our team makes mistakes.
Yeah.
That is the number one thing that politics needs in order to get better, is the ability to say, we screwed up, my team screwed up, this is a mistake, let's address this and change this, as opposed to the immediate reaction of refusing to acknowledge or engage in those conversations.
Yeah, for me, it's part of the reason why I don't like being involved in partisan politics, even though I'm very political and very much interested in politics, is that you can't criticize your team because you're seen as weakening the brand or the group, and you can't give credit when another team does something good. And one of the things, like if I was forming government, there'd be a statute of limitations on how long you can blame the previous government for your mistakes and whatnot. Like, you've been in position for 6 months now, or in the case of the Trudeau government, going on 4 years. You can't keep blaming Harper for your mistakes, and you can't use the mistakes that they made in government to justify the mistakes that you're making.
Hey, Alberta NDP, can you listen to what Robbie is saying here? Take notes.
You know, and in fairness to the Alberta NDP, it's not just them in Alberta, and you see that from the UCP, you see that from the Alberta Party, not as much, but it's consistent. It's every single government does this. They blame the previous government. Like, I swear to God, the Liberals probably have a giant picture of Stephen Harper, and they just throw things at him every time something goes wrong. It is not Stephen Harper's fault anymore.
Yeah.
And so there is and even on this particular file, Trudeau mentioned Harper in question period. Like, no, unless he's controlling you and telling you what to do, this is not Stephen Harper's fault.
Take ownership, or move forward on this, and not blame the other party. But it's kind of a campaign strategy. I mean, it's bold, I guess. It kind of works, but
it's also interesting because on Twitter I've seen a lot of people react and say, like, well, you know, I might not like what Trudeau did, but Andrew Scheer is just a white national. Like, they just go so far to the other side. And what people don't realize is Twitter is not real life.
Yeah.
The vast majority of people in the world are not polarized that way. They're in the middle, and they care about what happens with their families and their job and their everyday existence. And so this inside baseball stuff is not going to matter to your average Canadian when they go to the polls in October.
No, I don't think so. I think if they go to the polls, that's a whole other question, because I think that there probably is a little bit of cynicism right now towards politics and who to believe and who to trust.
I think that's the problem with the whataboutism and the tribalism that we have in politics right now, is that people who don't subscribe to or belong to a party, and on average only about 2.5% to 3% of citizens ever purchase a membership in a political party. So you look at 95% plus of our voters aren't subscribed to that tribalism, and when they see it and they see politicians getting off with corrupt practices or interfering in decisions around criminal charges, things like that, what it does is it actually tunes people out of the political process. And what we need to have politicians be accountable for decisions regardless of their partisan stripe. And we need to be able to look at somebody who's on a different political party or political team and say, hey, you know what, you did this really good, more effective. And I think if we did more to encourage politicians and support politicians who acknowledged when a competitor does a good job and also acknowledged when they screwed something up, then people would be more interested in getting involved, supporting, donating, volunteering, and getting out and voting.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. This leads me to I do think it's important to talk about the media's role in this as well. And there was a huge story or a huge controversy for those that are not living in Alberta that didn't see a post-media article or a post-media paper that had the UCP do a wrap around what the NDP cuts would mean. And that enraged a lot of people in Alberta, no matter what side that they're on. And there's been a huge controversy. One of the controversies that's come up in this is the role a paper like the Toronto Star has played in this, and how there's some that feel, and one of the conversations is that they're the liberal propaganda. So what is the media's role in this? How, like, not only specifically in this political landscape, how are you feeling about that? I mean, I think that there's a bit of a broader scope in here than specifically Jody Wilson-Raybould, but I do think it's relevant.
Yeah, and certainly in Alberta politics as well, it's relevant. And there's this perception that the media is biased, and I think inherently a lot of us have biases. But what's an important piece is to be able to acknowledge and show that bias. And there's this blurring that has occurred between columnists who write opinion and reporters who are supposed to write the news. And there is also a separation between reporters and the corporations. And so if you look at the last election, there was Post Media pretty much across the board endorsed the Conservative Party, where you had reporters and columnists who were quite pissed off, frankly, about that because they didn't think that that was the right choice. And so, again, it's not very black and white, but I think sometimes the media does themselves a disservice by blurring those lines. And it's part of the problem with the rise of social media, the rise of podcasting, the rise of blogging is, and I know I'm speaking with forked tongue because I do all these things, you have people that don't have per se a professional background, but they are opinionated and educated or experienced within the political realm who are now adding commentary, and those lines become more and more blurred every day. And so there does need to be a clear delineation between what is fact-based news and what is opinion/commentary. And I think that you do need to be able to acknowledge and see those biases. And as voters, I know for myself, one of the things I make a point of doing is I try to consume media from various sources that might lean more right-wing and that might lean more left-wing, because they give you a more fulsome picture of what the real truth might be.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that one of my most enjoyable things, and I say that with a little bit of sarcasm, is one of my friends is quite right-wing, and frequently he will send me things on Twitter that are infuriating him, and we'll describe it as liberal bias, and then I will go on Twitter to look at said liberal bias thing, and then see tons of comments from people saying that it's right-wing bias. Mm. So a lot of this is that people are also responsible, like Robbie said, for having different perspectives and reading different things, but people are going to see what they're going to see. If you write an article saying the UCP have a good approach to human trafficking, and that's all you wrote, people would be like, you're just a right-wing shill, aren't you? If you wrote something saying the NDP have decreased child poverty by half since they came into office, you're liberal bias. Like, I think the thing is that a lot of this is that people don't like to have messages put in front of them that challenge their beliefs. And so instead of actually reading something and saying, okay, this is a good piece of policy or this is a good thing that happened, they want to call it out for being a biased report.
And yeah, it's interesting because I think what you guys are trying to say is it's okay for us as human beings to think and not necessarily just accept everything that is in front of us, challenge it, debate it, and it doesn't matter what side it is. Think about it and form your own opinion. You're asking humans to be responsible. This is outrageous. It's quite fascinating because there is such a loud noise. It's, as one of my friends put it, it's whoever speaks the loudest wins sometimes on social media, and that's where that gets through. So it's tough to get into that nuance, I guess. But yeah.
Well, and overall, people just don't like to have their beliefs challenged.
Yeah.
Generally, and I think we all need to be better at being open to having our beliefs challenged and to having a conversation, because I think it fundamentally makes you a better, more well-rounded person to be able to have those conversations. Even if you still walk away believing what you believe, I think you can have a more nuanced perspective on things.
Yeah. So in terms of this, what are, like, if you had Jody Wilson-Raybould in the room and I had someone from the Liberal government in the room, what are some of your questions that you have going forward?
Oh, that's a good question. I think certainly to be able to answer those questions, we need to hear and see more of, now that Jody Wilson-Raybould has had the opportunity to, quote unquote, speak her truth, have a response that addresses her concerns. I think that without knowing the content of the conversations that occurred after her departure as the Attorney General and Justice Minister, it's hard to know the full picture and the full story of what did occur here. And I think that there's more investigation and more conversation that needs to happen in order to get the full picture of what really went down and whether there were legal lines crossed. I don't think there's any argument here that there were some ethical boundaries pushed. So definitely finding out what happened after she went to Veterans Affairs and after she stepped down as the Veterans Affairs Minister helps to provide some clarity there. And hearing responses from people like Michael Wernick, like Jerry Butts, like Katie Telford, having them be able to fill in and color some of those pieces that are missing now.
Like, I don't know if I can just say ditto, because like basically everything that Robbie said was what I was going to say for the most part. I mean, I think we really just need to get answers and to understand what happened, and really also we have to keep in mind at this point, on Friday, the Liberal government said that they are still open to giving a deferred prosecution agreement to SNC-Lavalin. So we really need to understand what happened previously, but also to really pressure our government to maybe not do that would be nice.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, in my view, that would be complete political stupidity. And strategic suicide.
Yeah.
But that being said, I kind of expect it's actually going to happen.
Yeah, and we also have to remember that, I mean, Selena Chavez, I'm going to completely screw up her last name, Chavez, she resigned. She said she's not running again today. I think we'll see a lot of, maybe more Liberal MPs saying they aren't running. I mean, this is an impact on the Liberal government and their wholeness as a caucus. So I think until the Prime Minister addresses this appropriately, and also we still don't know whether or not Jody Wilson-Raybould is going to stay in caucus or if she's still going to run for the Liberals. She said that she would, like only, I think it was a week and a half ago. So there's a lot still to determine.
Do you see her crossing a floor?
If Jagmeet Singh hadn't won his by-election, I could totally see her going towards the NDP. I think that the Conservatives would love to have her, but their track record on Indigenous rights and the nation-to-nation relationship has been very poor, and so I don't see her going there. I was having a conversation this morning with some of my kind of political allies, and we were talking about this, and I truly, genuinely believe that Jody Wilson-Raybould is committed to the Liberals. She's not committed to Justin Trudeau. And so I think that that's why she's still trying to stay in caucus. She's made comments, I was elected as a Liberal. It's my intention to continue to represent my constituency as a Liberal MP. And it's been interesting to see, like even with the MP Selena Cesar Chavez and some of the other cabinet ministers and MPs in the Liberal Party posting pictures of them together with Jody Wilson-Raybould and tweeting out things in support for her. I think there's a fracture in the Liberal Party, and I don't think that there's a huge motivation on the part of Jody Wilson-Raybould to leave the Liberal Party.
Could she lead it?
I think there's potential there. The immediate person who stands out to me, though, is Chrystia Freeland. I think she's the star.
She's the heir apparent.
Yeah, the heir apparent in my view. And I know quite a few people, even in Alberta, who identify as conservative that have said that they would vote for Chrystia Freeland if she was the Liberal leader.
Yeah, I think also, there's other opportunities for Jody Wilson-Raybould. Perry Bellegarde is towards the end of his term in terms of leading the National Assembly of Indigenous People. So there's that as an option for her as well. There's a lot of things that she can do. I think I agree with Robbie. She's not going to cross to the Conservatives. Their reactions just in one case, in the Colton Bushy case, was not good. I can't imagine that she would feel comfortable there, that it would be aligned with her values. But again, I think that too, I don't think that the Liberals would turf Trudeau in a minute, even if it was her, Christina Freeland, or whoever else. They believe firmly, and they're probably correct, that he has at least another term in him. And that party is built on the star power of Justin Trudeau, whether you agree with it or not.
Yeah.
So I don't foresee that changing.
Yeah, I agree. Well, this was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it. I thank you guys for coming on. How do we follow you on Twitter?
So my Twitter is at RKS Alberta.
I was like, that's short. Mine is at KRISTINRAWORTH. Kristen Rayworth.
We will have to talk more about the Alberta. We're in the pre-election mode of this, but when the election is called or getting forward, I'd love to talk to you more about what's going on there, because I think it's quite fascinating, and I think will catch the eye of the entire country.
Yeah, absolutely. Love to join you then.
Right.
Absolutely.
Of course, and follow me, KEVOLE, Spreaker.com, KEVOLE, iTunes, Spotify, Facebook as well. We'll talk to you all soon. Bye for now.
On the website, The Athletic, they published a story that was entitled, "Once at a Place of No Hope, Sharks broadcaster Jamie Baker is gratefully alive." It was beautifully written by Katie Strang, and Bakes is here to talk about it now, and I know this isn't easy, Bakes, but the first thing I got to ask you is why you decided to go public with something that for most people would be so private.
Hanging on here. It's been hard few days.
Hang in there, buddy.
When I took the leave of absence last year, I knew I wanted to talk about it at some point, but I had to be strong enough to do it. I don't look strong right now, but I've been through a lot the last year. I've worked really hard, and I wanted to get the right person. And I had no timetable. I just knew that I wanted to tell a story because it was the right thing to do. Because I've been through a lot of things that people didn't know. And, Bell Let's Talk Day, I guess a month or so ago, I sent out a tweet, and I got some people that contacted me. And I got in touch with Katie Strang and talked to her, and I thought she would be perfect, and I thought she did a really admirable, phenomenal, terrific job. A lot of, background talking to people I know and really getting a historical look at my struggles.
There are so many powerful things in the article, and of course those of us who traveled with you and who count you as a friend knew some of these things that were going on, and I'll leave it for the viewers to read the article and read about some of the tough times. Talk about coming out of the darkness back into the light now, and what it's been like for you this season, being back on the air and being back doing what you love and being around the people you love again in such a positive light?
Well, it starts with your support group, your family and friends. And honestly, I did a little shout out at the post-game show last night and got emotional. And the San Jose Sharks organization has been amazing. And I really, truly hope other organizations and companies can do what the San Jose Sharks have done for me, for people that struggle with mental health issues. They paid me while I was on a leave of absence. They've been with me the whole time. They gave me a job back this year. You guys have been phenomenal, my family, my friends. And then I went and, the NHLPA helped me get a therapist in San Jose and the right psychiatrist. I have medications that have stabilized my brain. I've done a lot of work, neurofeedback and brain mapping, and then I've created a daily routine. I call it Train the Brain. And through all of that, there's stability. I sleep now, and I don't have all the mood disorders and the impulsiveness and the depression. And I battled depression for 15, 20 years.
Bakes, we are so proud of you for coming out, and it's such a huge step to come public with this. It has inspired thousands, I'm sure. I've had so many messages, I can only imagine what you've had as well. And a shout out to Katie Strang, just a remarkable job. Check it out. It's at theathletic.com, a remarkable